The smell of lilies and bullshit filled the air at Riverside Funeral Home, and I couldn't tell which was stronger. My brother David lay in his mahogany casket, looking more peaceful than he'd ever been in life, while his widow Evelyn dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than most people's rent. "He was such a devoted husband," she whispered to the parade of mourners, her voice breaking at just the right moments. "I don't know how I'll manage without him." I stood in the corner, nursing my third whiskey of the morning, watching my sister-in-law perform her grief like she was auditioning for an Oscar. The black Chanel dress hugged her curves perfectly, and her blonde hair fell in calculated waves across her shoulders. Even in mourning, Evelyn Grant looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. My best friend Trent Walsh appeared at my elbow, his massive frame blocking my view of the casket. "Hell of a turnout," he said, straightening his tie. "David would have been proud." "David would have been drunk," I replied, taking another sip. "Just like me." Trent chuckled, but his eyes were scanning the room, lingering on Evelyn as she accepted condolences from the mayor's wife. I'd known Trent since high school, back when we were both scrapping for respect in this uptight Hudson Valley town. Now he owned the biggest car dealership in 3 counties, complete with those cheesy commercials where he pointed at the camera and promised, "Walsh's deals that won't fail ya." The service dragged on for another hour. Father Mackenzie delivered a eulogy that made David sound like a saint instead of the gambling addict who'd blown through half the family fortune before his heart gave out at 42. I kept my mouth shut and let the lies flow. Afterward, everyone gathered at the Grant Mansion for the wake. The Victorian monstrosity had been in our family for 4 generations, its towers and gables looming over the Hudson River like something out of a Gothic novel. David had modernized the interior with Evelyn's help, trading antique charm for sleek minimalism that felt about as warm as a morgue. I found myself in David's study, staring at the wall of law books he'd never read. The room still smelled like his cigars and cologne. A crystal decanter of scotch sat on his desk, and I helped myself to a generous pour. "Oliver." My mother Caroline's voice cut through my brooding. She stood in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her black dress as simple and elegant as Evelyn's was flashy. "We need to talk." "Not now, Mom. I'm communing with the dead." She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "I found something in David's safe, something you need to see." Before I could respond, voices echoed from the hallway. Evelyn's laugh, high and musical, followed by Trent's deeper chuckle. They were coming this way. "Hide," Caroline whispered, grabbing my arm and pulling me behind the massive oak desk. The door opened, and I heard Evelyn's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Finally," she breathed. "I thought we'd never get a moment alone." "The grieving widow act is getting old." Trent's voice was rough with desire. "When can we stop pretending?" My blood turned to ice. I crouched behind the desk, my mother's hand gripping my shoulder like a vice. "Soon," Evelyn purred. "Once the will is read and everything's settled, then we can be together properly." "What about Oliver? He's going to inherit half of everything." Evelyn laughed, cold and sharp. "Oliver's a drunk and a loser. He'll blow through his share in a year, just like his brother. Besides, I have plans for dear Oliver." The sound of rustling fabric filled the room. I risked a glance around the edge of the desk and immediately wished I hadn't. Trent had Evelyn pressed against David's bookshelf, her dress hiked up around her waist, his hands roaming over her body like he owned it. "God, I've missed this," he groaned, his mouth on her neck. "The funeral made me so wet," she gasped, "knowing he's finally gone, knowing we can have everything we wanted." My hands clenched into fists. My brother wasn't even cold yet, and his wife was ducking my best friend in his study, talking about spending his money. The rage built in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. Caroline's grip tightened, holding me in place. She knew if I stood up now, I'd do something we'd all regret. The sounds intensified. Trent's grunts, Evelyn's moans, the rhythmic thump of the bookshelf against the wall. I closed my eyes and tried to block it out, but their words burned into my memory. "Once we're married, we'll sell this place," Evelyn panted. "Buy something in the Hamptons, somewhere we can start fresh." "What about the kids?" "What about them? They're not even his, remember?" The world tilted. David's daughters, sweet little Emma and Sophie, weren't his biological children. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Jesus, Evie, keep your voice down." "Relax. Oliver's too drunk to notice anything. He never suspected about us, did he? Even when we were ducking right under his nose at his own wedding." My wedding. They'd been having an affair since my wedding day 7 years ago. Every dinner, every holiday, every family gathering where I'd welcomed Trent into my home, he'd been screwing my brother's wife behind our backs. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Trent wasn't just my best friend. He was the brother I'd chosen, the guy who'd stood beside me through every crisis and celebration of my adult life. And Evelyn, for all her faults, was family. She was David's wife, the mother of his children, someone I'd protected and supported even when she drove me crazy with her demands and drama. They finished with a series of muffled gasps and groans. I heard the sound of zippers and rustling clothes as they made themselves presentable. "We should get back," Evelyn said, her voice already shifting back to the grieving widow tone. "People will wonder where I am." 5 more minutes, Trent pleaded. "I need to hold you." "Later. Come by the house tomorrow night after Oliver leaves for work. We'll have all the time in the world." Their footsteps retreated, and the door clicked shut. Caroline and I remained frozen behind the desk for another full minute, making sure they were really gone. Finally, I stood up, my legs shaking with rage and adrenaline. "How long have you known?" Caroline's face was pale but determined. "I suspected for months. David hired a private investigator before he died. He found out about the affair, about the girl's real father." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "It's all in here. Photos, DNA tests, financial records showing Trent's been helping himself to David's accounts." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The photos were grainy but clear enough. Trent and Evelyn in various compromising positions, timestamps showing the affair had been going on for over 3 years. The DNA report confirmed that neither Emma nor Sophie shared David's genetic markers, but they did match samples taken from Trent's coffee cup. "My God," I whispered. David knew. He was planning to file for divorce. That's why he had the heart attack. The stress, the betrayal, the financial strain from Trent's embezzlement. It all caught up with him. I sank into David's leather chair, the weight of the revelation crushing down on me. My brother had died knowing his wife was cheating on him with his best friend, knowing his children weren't his own, knowing his trust had been betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. "We have to expose them," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. Caroline shook her head. "David made me promise to wait. He wanted you to decide what to do with the information. He said you'd know the right time. The right time is now. I'm going to march out there and tell everyone what I saw." "And then what? You'll destroy those little girls' lives? You'll tear apart 2 families based on anger and hurt?" Caroline's voice was gentle but firm. "David wanted justice, but he also wanted to protect Emma and Sophie. They're innocent in all this." I stared at the photos, my mind racing. Evelyn and Trent looked so happy, so carefree, while David was slowly dying of stress and heartbreak. The injustice of it burned in my gut like acid. "What do you suggest I do? Pretend I didn't see anything? Let them get away with it?" "I suggest you be smart. Be patient. David's will is being read tomorrow. Once you know where you stand financially, you can decide how to proceed." Caroline stood and smoothed her dress. "But remember, revenge is a dish best served cold, and your brother always said you were the smarter Grant's son." She left me alone in the study with the evidence of my family's destruction. I poured another scotch and stared out the window at the Hudson River, watching the sun set over the water. Somewhere in the house, Evelyn was playing the grieving widow, while Trent offered his shoulder to cry on. They had no idea I knew their secret. For now, that gave me the advantage. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket and rejoined the wake, plastering a smile on my face and accepting condolences from people who probably knew more about my family's business than I did. Small towns were like that. Secrets had a way of becoming common knowledge, except for the people most affected by them. Trent found me by the bar, his face flushed and his hair slightly mussed. "Hell of a day," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "How are you holding up?" I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of guilt or remorse. All I saw was the same easy confidence that had made him popular in high school and successful in business. He was a natural salesman, able to lie with a smile and make you thank him for it. "I'm managing," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Thanks for being here. David would have appreciated it." "Of course, man. We're family." Family. The word tasted like poison in my mouth. I excused myself and found Evelyn holding court in the living room, surrounded by the town's social elite. She looked up as I approached, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Oliver," she said, rising to embrace me. "I'm so sorry for your loss. David loved you so much." I let her hug me, smelling Trent's cologne on her skin, feeling the warmth of her body that had been pressed against another man's just an hour earlier. Thank you, Evelyn. I know this is hard for you, too. I don't know what I'm going to do without him, she whispered, her voice breaking convincingly. The girls and I are so lost. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen her with Trent, hadn't heard her callous words about my brother's death, I might have believed her grief was genuine. Instead, I felt like I was watching a masterclass in manipulation. The evening dragged on until finally, mercifully, the last mourner departed. I helped clean up, making small talk with Evelyn about funeral arrangements and thank you cards, all while the envelope burned against my chest like a brand. As I prepared to leave, Evelyn caught my arm. Oliver, wait. I wanted to talk to you about something. What's on your mind? David's will is being read tomorrow. I know you're expecting to inherit half of everything, but I hope you'll consider the girls' future. They're going to need security, education funds, a stable home. I studied her face, looking for cracks in the mask. Of course, Emma and Sophie are my priorities too. Relief flickered in her eyes. Good. I was worried you might want to sell the house or liquidate assets. This place is all they have left of their father. The irony was staggering. She was worried about her children's inheritance while planning to steal it with their biological father. I managed a reassuring smile. Don't worry about money, Evelyn. I'll make sure the girls are taken care of. I left the mansion and drove through the quiet streets of our small town, past the shops and restaurants that had been there since my childhood. Everything looked normal, peaceful, unchanged. But underneath the surface, rot was spreading like cancer. By the time I reached my apartment above my restaurant, I'd made my decision. Caroline was right about one thing. Revenge was best served cold. But she was wrong about something else. The right time wasn't some distant future date when the pain had faded and justice had been forgotten. The right time was now. I just had to be smart about it. The law offices of Hartwell, Morrison, and Associates occupied the top floor of the oldest building in town, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the Hudson Valley. I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room, drumming my fingers on the polished table while we waited for everyone to arrive. Evelyn entered first, dressed in a conservative black suit that managed to be both appropriate and stunning. She'd brought her friend Sasha Chen, a social media influencer who documented every moment of her life for her 1,000 followers. Sasha had her phone out, naturally, probably live streaming the will reading as authentic grief content. I hope you don't mind that I brought Sasha, Evelyn said, taking the seat across from me. I needed moral support. Of course not, I lied. Sasha was a vapid gossip who treated other people's tragedies like entertainment, but I wasn't about to start a fight before the will was read. Trent arrived next, looking uncomfortable in his best suit. He nodded at me and took a seat near the window, his eyes avoiding mine. I wondered if he was thinking about yesterday's performance in David's study. My mother Caroline was the last to arrive, accompanied by our family lawyer, Jasper Morrison. Jasper was a thin, precise man in his 60s who'd been handling Grant family business since before I was born. He carried a leather briefcase that probably contained the keys to our future. Thank you all for coming, Jasper began, settling into his chair at the head of the table. As you know, we're here to read the last will and testament of David Michael Grant, deceased. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this document was executed 6 months ago and reflects David's wishes at that time. 6 months ago? That would have been right around the time David discovered the affair. I glanced at Evelyn, but her face remained composed, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl. Jasper opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick document bound in blue covers. I'll skip the legal preamble and get to the relevant provisions. To my beloved wife Evelyn, I leave our family home and its contents, along with a trust fund of $500,000 for the care and education of our daughters Emma and Sophie. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed slightly. $500,000 wasn't the fortune she'd been expecting, but the house alone was worth over $2 million. To my brother Oliver, I leave my remaining assets, including all business interests, investment accounts, and personal property not specifically mentioned above. I did quick math in my head. David's restaurant group was worth at least $3 million, and his investment portfolio had been growing steadily for years. Even after his gambling debts, I was looking at a substantial inheritance, but Jasper wasn't finished. However, there is one additional provision that affects both beneficiaries. David has included what's known as a morality clause. The room went silent. Evelyn's face paled slightly, and I saw Trent shift uncomfortably in his chair. What's a morality clause? Sasha whispered, her phone still recording. Jasper cleared his throat. It states that if Evelyn remarries within 2 years of David's death, or if evidence emerges that she was unfaithful during their marriage, her inheritance will be forfeit and transferred to Oliver, with the exception of a modest trust for the children's education. The silence stretched like a taut wire. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Evelyn's hands were trembling now, her composure finally cracking. That's ridiculous, she stammered. David would never have done something so cruel. I'm afraid he was quite specific about his concerns, Jasper replied gently. He also included a provision that if Oliver can provide evidence of adultery, the transfer of assets will be immediate. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. David had known about the affair and had set a trap for his cheating wife. The envelope in my jacket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This is outrageous, Evelyn said, her voice rising. I was a devoted wife. I loved David completely. Of course you did, Caroline said smoothly. I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. Trent had gone completely white. He was staring at his hands, probably calculating how much money he was about to lose. The car dealership was successful, but not buy a mansion and support a wife and 2 kids successful. Jasper continued reading the smaller bequests and legal provisions, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing, processing the implications of David's final gambit. He'd given me the power to destroy Evelyn and Trent, but he'd also made sure I couldn't act impulsively. I needed evidence, and I needed to be prepared for the consequences. When the reading concluded, Evelyn practically fled from the room, Sasha trailing behind her with the phone still recording. Trent lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, but then thought better of it and left without a word. Caroline and I remained seated as Jasper packed up his papers. Did you know about the morality clause? I asked my mother. She nodded. David showed me the will before he signed it. He was hoping he wouldn't need it, that somehow the marriage could be saved, but he wanted to protect the family assets. And you're okay with this? With me potentially taking everything from Evelyn and the girls? Caroline's expression hardened. Those girls will be provided for regardless. But Evelyn made her choices. If she's been faithful, she has nothing to fear. Jasper looked up from his briefcase. Oliver, I should mention that your brother also left you this. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. I waited until I was alone in my car to open it. David's letter was brief but devastating. Oliver, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you know the truth about Evelyn and Trent. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't bear to tell you while I was alive. You trusted them both, and they betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The evidence is overwhelming, but the decision of what to do with it is yours. I've given you the legal tools to seek justice, but I won't force your hand from beyond the grave. Whatever you choose, I'll understand. Just remember that Emma and Sophie are innocent. They don't deserve to suffer for their mother's sins. I love you, brother. Take care of our family. David. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, reading the letter over and over until the words were burned into my memory. David had carried this burden alone for months, watching his wife and best friend betray him while he slowly died of stress and heartbreak. The rage I'd felt yesterday was nothing compared to what I experienced now. This wasn't just about adultery or even theft. This was about the systematic destruction of a good man by the people who were supposed to love him most. My phone buzzed with a text from Trent. Want to grab a beer? Rough day. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted to commiserate about my brother's death while planning to spend his inheritance with his widow. I typed back, rain check. Need some time alone. Another text, this one from Evelyn. Can we talk? I'm worried about the girl's future. I didn't respond. Let her worry. Let her wonder if I suspected anything. Fear was a powerful weapon, and I was just learning how to use it. That evening, I drove to the Lantern, a dive bar on the outskirts of town where I could drink in peace without running into anyone I knew. The bartender was a grizzled ex-cop named Murphy who minded his own business and poured heavy drinks. Rough day? He asked, sliding a whiskey across the scarred wooden bar. My brother's will was read today. Murphy nodded sympathetically. Money makes people crazy. I've seen families torn apart over a lot less than what you Grants are probably dealing with. He had no idea how right he was. I was halfway through my second drink when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Grant? This is Heinrich Weber from Credit Suisse in Zurich. I'm calling about your inheritance from your Uncle Klaus. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm sorry, what? Your Uncle Klaus Weber passed away last month. You were listed as his sole beneficiary. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. I think you have the wrong person. I don't have an Uncle Klaus. Klaus Weber, your mother's brother. He emigrated to Switzerland in 1975 and made quite a fortune in banking. According to our records, you are Oliver James Grant, son of Caroline Weber Grant. My mother's maiden name was Weber, but she'd never mentioned having a brother in Switzerland. How much are we talking about? $47 million, Mr. Grant, plus a house in Gstaad and various other assets. The bar spun around me. $47 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Enough to make David's inheritance look like pocket change. Are you certain about this? Quite certain. Your uncle was very specific about his wishes. He wanted his American nephew to have a chance at the life he never had. There are some legal formalities to complete, but the inheritance is yours. I managed to get Weber's contact information and promised to call him back the next day. Then I sat at the bar, staring at my reflection in the mirror behind the bottles, trying to process what had just happened. $47 million. I was rich beyond my wildest dreams, completely independent of whatever happened with David's estate. The morality clause didn't matter anymore. I could expose Evelyn and Trent or let them keep their stolen fortune. Either way, I'd be fine. But as I thought about David's letter, about his pain and betrayal, I realized money wasn't the point. This was about justice. This was about making sure that good people didn't suffer while evil ones prospered. I paid my tab and drove home, my mind already working on a plan. Evelyn and Trent thought they were safe, thought they'd gotten away with their crimes. They had no idea that their victim's brother had just become one of the wealthiest men in New York State. The game was about to change, and I held all the cards. The flight to Zurich took 8 hours, giving me plenty of time to think about what I was walking into. Heinrich Weber had been insistent that I come in person to claim the inheritance, something about Swiss banking laws and identity verification. I'd left town quietly, telling only my mother where I was going. Credit Suisse occupied a gleaming tower in Zurich's financial district, all glass and steel reaching toward the gray Swiss sky. Weber met me in the marble lobby, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Grant, welcome to Switzerland. I trust your flight was comfortable? Long, but uneventful. I still can't believe this is real. Weber smiled as we rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. Your Uncle Klaus was quite a character. He arrived here with nothing but ambition and built a small empire in commodity trading. When he learned about you through a private investigator, he was determined to leave everything to family. The private banking floor was hushed and elegant, with Persian rugs and oil paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. Weber led me to a conference room where several documents were spread across a mahogany table. Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity, Weber said, producing a DNA testing kit. Swiss law requires genetic confirmation for inheritances of this magnitude. I provided the required samples and waited while they were rushed to the lab. Within 2 hours, the results confirmed what Weber already knew. I was indeed Klaus Weber's nephew and sole heir. Congratulations, Mr. Grant. You are now worth $47.3 million. The number still didn't feel real. I'd grown up middle class, worked my way through college, built my restaurant business from nothing. Now I was suddenly wealthy enough to buy and sell half the people in my hometown. What are the conditions? I asked. There have to be conditions. Weber consulted his notes. Your uncle specified that the money should be used to right wrongs and protect family honor. He was quite concerned about justice, having fled Germany during some unpleasant business in the 1970s. What kind of unpleasant business? The less said about that, the better. Your uncle believed in taking care of problems permanently, but he hoped you would be more circumspect in your methods. I signed dozens of documents, each one transferring another piece of Klaus Weber's empire to my name. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, even a small vineyard in the Rhone Valley. By the time we finished, my head was spinning. The money will be transferred to accounts of your choosing within 48 hours, Weber explained. I would recommend keeping the inheritance confidential until you decide how to proceed. Sudden wealth can attract unwanted attention. I flew back to New York in first class, sipping champagne and planning my next moves. Evelyn and Trent had no idea their world was about to collapse. They thought they were dealing with a grieving brother, who might cause some minor trouble over David's will. They had no clue they were facing someone with unlimited resources and a burning desire for justice. The first phase of my plan was already in motion. Before leaving for Switzerland, I'd hired a private security firm to conduct surveillance on both Trent and Evelyn. If they were still having an affair, I'd have fresh evidence to supplement what David had gathered. The second phase would be more complex. I needed to isolate them from their support networks, turn their friends against them, make them pariahs in the community they'd worked so hard to impress. Small towns were perfect for this kind of social warfare. Reputation was everything, and scandal spread faster than wildfire. The third phase would be the kill shot, a public exposure that would destroy them completely and leave them with nothing but each other and the wreckage of their lies. I landed at JFK and drove straight home, eager to check in with my surveillance team. The head investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia Stone, had left several messages on my voicemail. "Mr. Grant, please call me as soon as you get this. We've documented several meetings between the subjects, and there's been an interesting development with a third party." I called her from my apartment, pouring myself a scotch as she delivered her report. "Your sister-in-law and Mr. Walsh have been meeting regularly at the Riverside Motel on Route 9. We have photos and video of them entering and leaving together. But that's not the interesting part." "What's the interesting part?" "Evelyn Grant has been in contact with a man named Marcus Torres, a private investigator from Albany. She hired him to look into your finances, specifically to determine if you have any hidden assets that might affect the inheritance." My blood ran cold. If Torres was competent, he might uncover the Swiss connection before I was ready to reveal it. "How much does he know?" "We're not sure yet. We've put him under surveillance too, but he's being careful. Professional courtesy and all that. I need you to find out everything Torres knows and everything he's told Evelyn. Cost is no object." "Understood. There's one more thing. We intercepted a phone call between Evelyn and Walsh. They're planning something for this weekend while you're supposedly out of town. Walsh mentioned bringing his cousin Mason to handle any complications. Mason Walsh was a walking stereotype, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and attitude, with a criminal record that included assault and extortion. If Trent was bringing him into the picture, they were escalating beyond adultery and theft. Handle what complications? They didn't specify, but the context suggested they're worried about you discovering their affair. Mason has a reputation for making problems disappear. I felt a chill run down my spine. Were they actually considering violence? The thought seemed absurd, but people did crazy things when millions of dollars were at stake. "I want round-the-clock protection," I said, "and I want to know every move they make. Already arranged. You'll have a shadow team starting tonight." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, staring out at the lights of the Hudson Valley. The game had just gotten deadlier, but I had advantages they couldn't imagine. Unlimited resources, professional help, and most importantly, the element of surprise. My phone buzzed with a text from Trent. "Hey man, want to grab dinner tomorrow? Haven't seen you since the funeral." The casual tone was chilling. He was planning God knows what with his criminal cousin while texting me about dinner plans. I typed back, "Sure, the lantern at 7. "Perfect. Looking forward to catching up." I forwarded the conversation to Patricia Stone with a note. "They're accelerating their timeline. Be ready for anything." The next evening, I arrived at the lantern 15 minutes early, wanting to scope out the scene before Trent arrived. Murphy was behind the bar as usual, polishing glasses and watching a baseball game on the old television mounted in the corner. "Back again so soon?" he asked, sliding a whiskey across the bar. "Meeting a friend. Hopefully it stays friendly." Murphy's cop instincts kicked in. He studied my face, probably reading the tension I was trying to hide. Expecting trouble? Always expecting trouble. That's how you avoid it. Trent walked in exactly at 7, looking relaxed and confident in his expensive casual clothes. He'd always been good-looking in a generic way, tall, athletic, with the kind of smile that sold cars and charmed wives. Tonight, that smile looked predatory. "Oliver," he clapped me on the back like we were still best friends. "Good to see you, man. How are you holding up?" "One day at a time. You know how it is." We took a booth in the back corner, away from the other patrons. Trent ordered a beer and launched into small talk about business and local gossip, but I could see him working up to something more serious. "I wanted to talk to you about Evelyn," he said finally. "She's really struggling with David's death. I've been trying to help her through it, but she needs family support too." The hypocrisy was staggering. He was screwing the woman while pretending to be a concerned friend offering support. I appreciate you looking out for her. The thing is, she's worried about the will. That morality clause has her scared. She thinks someone might try to make trouble for her, maybe spread rumors or lies to get their hands on the inheritance. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of rumors? You know how small towns are. People see a widow talking to a male friend and suddenly she's having an affair. It's ridiculous, but Evelyn's reputation is fragile right now. I'm sure anyone spreading lies about David's widow would face serious consequences. Trent's smile faltered slightly. Exactly. That's what I told her. Some consequences might be more serious than others, if you know what I mean. There it was, the threat, delivered with a smile and a friendly tone. I was supposed to be intimidated by the implication that Mason Walsh might pay me a visit if I caused trouble. I appreciate you looking out for family, I said. David would have wanted that. We finished our drinks and parted ways with handshakes and promises to stay in touch. As soon as Trent left, I called Patricia Stone. Did you get all that? Every word. We had directional microphones on your table. That was definitely a threat. Probably enough for a restraining order if you want to go that route. Not yet. Let them think their intimidation worked. How's the investigation into Torres going? We got lucky. His computer security is garbage for a private investigator. Evelyn hired him to find hidden assets, but she also asked him to dig up dirt on you. Anything that might discredit you if this goes to court. What did he find? Nothing useful. Your finances are clean, your business is legitimate, and your personal life is boring. But here's the interesting part. Torres found evidence that you recently came into a large sum of money, but he can't figure out where it came from. He knows about the Swiss bank transfers, but the source is hidden behind layers of legal protection. Perfect. Torres had enough information to make Evelyn suspicious, but not enough to understand what she was really dealing with. What's his next move? He's planning to approach you directly, probably with some cover story about investigating David's death. Evelyn wants him to get close to you, maybe search your apartment or office. Let him come. I'll be ready. The next morning, I drove to David's grave in Riverside Cemetery. The headstone was simple black granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Husband and Father." No mention of the betrayal that had killed him. No hint of the lies that had surrounded his final months. I placed fresh flowers on the grave and spoke quietly to my brother's memory. I'm going to make this right, David. They're going to pay for what they did to you. A car pulled up behind me, and I turned to see Evelyn getting out of her Mercedes. She wore a simple black dress and carried a bouquet of white roses, playing the grieving widow role even when she thought no one was watching. Oliver, she said, approaching the grave. I didn't expect to see you here. I come every morning. It helps me feel close to him. She knelt and placed her roses next to my flowers, her performance flawless as always. He loved you so much. You were the brother he always wanted to be. The comment stung because it was probably true. David had always been the responsible one, the one who followed rules and tried to do the right thing. I was the rebel, the one who took risks and bent rules when necessary. He was a good man, I said. He deserved better. Evelyn looked up at me sharply, searching my face for hidden meaning. Better how? Better health, more time with the girls, a chance to see them grow up. She relaxed slightly. Yes, he did. I just wish I could have saved him somehow. Some things can't be saved. Some betrayals are too deep to heal. This time she definitely caught the undertone. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. What are you trying to say, Oliver? Just that David knew more than people thought. He was very observant, very thorough. He left behind quite a legacy. I walked away, leaving her kneeling by the grave with a confused and worried expression. The psychological pressure was building, and soon she'd make a mistake. They always did when they thought they were cornered. My phone rang as I reached my car. Unknown number, probably Torres making his move. Mr. Grant, this is Marcus Torres, private investigator. I'd like to speak with you about your brother's death. What about it? I have reason to believe David may have been murdered. Can we meet? The audacity was breathtaking. Torres was going to accuse me of murdering my own brother while working for the woman who'd actually killed him with betrayal and stress. I'm very interested in hearing your theory, I said. When and where? We arranged to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop in town. I spent the intervening hours preparing for the encounter, reviewing everything Patricia Stone had learned about Torres and his investigation. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. Torres was already there, a thin man in his 40s with the kind of mustache that went out of style in the 1980s. He'd chosen a corner table where he could watch the door, classic private eye paranoia. "Mr. Grant, thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be a difficult time. What makes you think David was murdered?" Torres opened a manila folder and spread several documents across the table. "Your brother's medical records show he was under extreme stress in the weeks before his death. His bank records show unusual withdrawals and transfers, and there are indications he was investigating someone close to him. All true, but Torres had the wrong suspect." "Who do you think killed him?" "I think someone discovered that David was onto their scheme. Someone with access to his accounts, someone who knew his routines, someone who would benefit from his death." Torres leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Someone like his brother, who stood to inherit millions of dollars." I laughed, genuinely amused by the accusation. "That's an interesting theory. Do you have any actual evidence?" "I know about the Swiss bank account, Oliver. $47 million is a lot of money to inherit right after your brother dies. Quite a coincidence." "It would be, if there were any connection between the two events. But my Uncle Klaus died of natural causes in Switzerland, witnessed by doctors and lawyers. His will was filed months before David's death." Torres's confidence wavered. He'd been expecting me to deny the Swiss inheritance or act surprised by his knowledge. Instead, I was calmly explaining facts he hadn't been able to uncover. "You've been very thorough," I continued. "But you're working for the wrong client. The person who killed David is the one who hired you." "That's ridiculous. Evelyn loved her husband." "Evelyn was having an affair with Trent Walsh for over 3 years. David found out and was planning to divorce her. The stress of the betrayal triggered his heart attack." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the surveillance photos Patricia Stone had taken. Trent and Evelyn entering the Riverside Motel, their body language making their relationship obvious. Torres stared at the photo, his face going pale. "Where did you get this?" "I have my own investigators. Much better than the ones Evelyn hired." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying his discomfort. "She played you, Torres. She hired you to frame me for David's death so she could inherit everything without worrying about the morality clause." "I don't believe it." "Check your bank account. I'll bet she paid you in cash, probably with money she stole from David's accounts. You're not just investigating a murder, Torres. You're helping cover one up." I left him sitting at the table, staring at the photo and probably reconsidering his entire investigation. Within an hour, Patricia Stone called to report that Torres had driven straight to the Riverside Motel and confronted Evelyn in the parking lot. "It got ugly," she reported. "Lots of shouting, some pushing. Torres accused her of using him to frame you. She denied everything, but he wasn't buying it. He demanded the rest of his fee and told her he was dropping the case." "How did she react?" "Like someone whose backup plan just fell apart. She made several phone calls after Torres left, probably to Walsh. They're meeting tonight at her house." "Time to spring the trap. Are you ready?" "We've been ready for days. Just give us the word." I drove home and opened a bottle of wine, David's favorite vintage from a vineyard in Napa Valley. Tomorrow, his killers would face justice. Tonight, I would toast his memory and prepare for the final phase of my plan. The endgame was about to begin. The surveillance photos arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, delivered by Patricia Stone herself. She spread them across my kitchen table like a dealer laying out cards. Trent's truck in Evelyn's driveway at midnight, lights on in the master bedroom until 3 a.m., Mason Walsh's motorcycle parked behind the garage. "They had a war council," Patricia reported, pouring herself coffee from my machine. "Very heated discussion about what to do with you. Walsh wanted to wait and see if Torres's accusations stuck. Evelyn wanted more direct action." Define direct action. Mason Walsh specializes in making people disappear. Not necessarily permanently, but long enough for problems to resolve themselves. They're planning to grab you tonight when you leave the restaurant. I studied the photos, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. They'd moved beyond adultery and theft to kidnapping, possibly murder. David's betrayers had become David's avengers' targets. "Change of plans," I said. "We're not waiting for them to make the first move. What do you have in mind?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Detective Lisa Morton's number. Morton was a 20-year veteran of the county sheriff's department, known for her integrity and her hatred of corruption. If anyone would listen to my story and act on it, she would. "Detective Morton, this is Oliver Grant. I need to report a conspiracy to commit kidnapping and murder." 3 hours later, Morton sat in my living room, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled over the past week. The DNA reports proving Trent was the father of Evelyn's children, the surveillance photos documenting their ongoing affair, the financial records showing unauthorized transfers from David's accounts, and finally, the audio recording of Trent's threat at the lantern. This is substantial, Morton admitted, closing the file folder. But most of it is circumstantial. The affair is clear, and that might be enough to trigger the morality clause in your brother's will. But conspiracy charges would be harder to prove. What if I could get them to confess on tape? That would change everything, but it would also be dangerous. If they're really planning to kidnap you, confronting them directly could get you killed. Not if I have backup. And not if they don't know I'm recording. Morton studied my face, probably trying to determine if I was serious or just grief-stricken and looking for revenge. What exactly are you proposing? A controlled confrontation. I call Evelyn and tell her I know about the affair, that I'm prepared to expose everything unless she meets my terms. She'll panic and call Trent, probably insist on meeting face-to-face to discuss damage control. And then? Then I get them to admit everything on tape while you and your people listen from the next room. Morton was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks and benefits. It could work, she said finally, but we'd need to control every variable, location, timing, backup plans if things go wrong. I know the perfect place. David's study in the family mansion. Evelyn still has keys, and it's isolated enough that they'll feel safe talking freely. How do you get them there? I tell Evelyn I found something in David's safe, something that could destroy all of us if it gets out. I suggest we meet at the house to discuss how to handle it quietly. Morton nodded slowly. She'll bring Walsh for protection, probably Mason too. Let them come. The more people involved in the conspiracy, the stronger the case against them. We spent the rest of the morning planning the operation. Morton would position unmarked cars around the mansion and have officers in the woods with listening equipment. I would wear a wire and try to get Evelyn and Trent to confess their crimes on tape. At 2 p.m., I called Evelyn's cell phone. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense and suspicious. Oliver, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. We need to talk, Evelyn. I found something in David's safe, something you're not going to like. A long pause. What kind of something? The kind that could destroy both our families if it comes to light. Can you meet me at the house tonight? Say 8 o'clock? I don't think that's a good idea. Why don't you just tell me over the phone? Because phones can be tapped and conversations can be recorded. This needs to be handled face-to-face, just family. Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear her mind racing, weighing options and calculating risks. Fine, 8 o'clock. But I'm bringing Trent for moral support. Of course, David always considered him family. I hung up and immediately called Patricia Stone. They took the bait. 8 o'clock at the mansion. We'll be ready. Try not to get yourself killed before we can arrest them. The next 6 hours crawled by like weeks. I tried to eat lunch but couldn't keep it down. I tried to read but couldn't concentrate. Finally, I drove to David's grave and spent an hour talking to his headstone, preparing myself mentally for what was coming. This is it, brother. Tonight, they pay for what they did to you. At 7:30, I arrived at the mansion. Morton's people were already in position, invisible in the gathering darkness. I let myself in through the front door and went straight to David's study, turning on the lights and settling into his leather chair behind the desk. The wire Patricia Stone had fitted me with was invisible under my shirt, but I could feel it against my skin like a guilty conscience. Everything I said and heard would be recorded, admissible in court if we got the confessions we needed. Evelyn arrived exactly at 8, using her key to enter through the kitchen door. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floors as she made her way to the study, followed by heavier footsteps that could only belong to Trent. Oliver, she called, where are you? In here. She appeared in the doorway, still beautiful but showing the strain of the past week. Dark circles under her eyes, tension lines around her mouth, her usual perfect composure cracking under pressure. Trent loomed behind her, trying to look casual but failing. His eyes darted around the room, probably looking for threats or escape routes. Mason Walsh brought up the rear, his massive frame filling the doorway like a wall of muscle and bad intentions. I didn't realize we were having a family reunion, I said, gesturing to Mason. Should I order pizza? Mason's here for security, Trent said. Given the circumstances, we thought it was prudent. What circumstances would those be? Evelyn moved to the center of the room, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. You said you found something in David's safe. What was it? I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the manila envelope David's private investigator had compiled. The photos, DNA reports, and financial records that proved their betrayal beyond any doubt. David knew, I said simply. He knew about the affair, about the girl's real father, about the money you stole from his accounts. He knew everything. The color drained from Evelyn's face. Trent took a step backward, his hand instinctively reaching for something in his jacket pocket. Mason remained motionless, waiting for orders. That's impossible, Evelyn whispered. David never said anything. David was a lot smarter than you gave him credit for. He hired investigators, collected evidence, built a case against both of you. The only reason he didn't expose you before he died was because he loved Emma and Sophie too much to destroy their lives. I spread the photos across the desk, making sure they could all see the damning evidence. Trent and Evelyn in various compromising positions, timestamps proving the affair had been going on for years. The DNA tests were particularly interesting, I continued. Emma and Sophie aren't David's daughters. They're yours, Trent, which makes this whole inheritance situation rather complicated. Trent's face had gone white. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. David documented everything. Bank records showing you helped yourself to his accounts. Hotel receipts from your romantic getaways, even recordings of phone conversations where you discussed killing him. We never discussed killing anyone, Evelyn snapped, then immediately realized her mistake. No? Then what did you discuss? How to drive him to an early grave with stress and betrayal. How to steal his money and his children and his wife while he was dying of a broken heart. Mason stepped forward, his hand moving to his jacket. I think we've heard enough. Actually, I don't think you've heard nearly enough. I stood up, facing all three of them across the desk. David left me a letter explaining everything. He wanted me to have choices about how to handle this situation. What kind of choices? Trent asked. I could expose you publicly, destroy your reputations, make sure everyone in town knows what you really are. I could pursue criminal charges for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Or what? Evelyn leaned forward, desperate for any way out of the trap. Or I could make you a deal. You confess everything, return the money you stole, and disappear from this town forever. In exchange, I keep the details private and make sure Emma and Sophie are provided for. It was a lie, of course. I had no intention of letting them escape justice. But I needed them to keep talking, to admit their crimes on tape where Morton's people could record every word. Trent and Evelyn exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Trent nodded to Mason, who stepped closer to the desk. Here's a counteroffer, Trent said. You give us all the evidence David collected, along with any copies you've made. In exchange, we let you live. That's not much of a deal. It's the only deal you're going to get. Mason here specializes in making problems disappear. You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can make you cooperate. Perfect. They just confessed to conspiracy and threatened my life on tape. Morton's people had everything they needed to make arrests. And if I refuse? Mason pulled a gun from his jacket, a small pistol that looked almost comical in his massive hand. Then you have an accident. Grieving brother, overcome with guilt and despair, takes his own life in the family study. Very tragic, very believable. You'd murder me for money? We'd eliminate a threat to our family, Evelyn said coldly. David was weak, but he was useful. You're just weak. The mask was completely off now. The grieving widow had been replaced by a calculating predator who saw people as obstacles to be removed or resources to be exploited. How long has this been going on? I asked. The affair, I mean. Trent smiled, probably thinking he'd already won. Since before you introduced us. Remember your wedding day? While you were dancing with your bride, I was ducking yours in the coat closet. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd been betraying me from the very beginning, laughing at my trust while they planned to steal everything I cared about. David found out by accident, Evelyn added. He hired an investigator to look into some missing money and discovered much more than he bargained for. The stress of it literally killed him. So you did murder him, just not with a weapon. We gave him exactly what he deserved, Trent said. A weak man married to a strong woman. Nature took its course. That was enough. I had everything Morton needed to destroy them in court. Now I just had to survive long enough for the cavalry to arrive. You're right, I said, sitting back down in David's chair. David was weak, but I'm not. Mason raised the gun, pointing it directly at my chest. Last chance, Oliver. the evidence, or your life. Go ahead, I said calmly. Shoot me in David's study in front of witnesses with police listening outside. See how that works out for you. Mason's eyes widened. Trent spun toward the window, suddenly understanding that they'd walked into a trap. Evelyn's face went white as she realized the full implications of what they'd confessed. You're bluffing, Trent said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Look outside, genius. Those aren't gardeners hiding in the bushes. The front door burst open with a crash that echoed through the mansion. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway as Morton's tactical team moved into position. Police! Drop your weapons! Mason spun toward the door, his gun wavering between me and the approaching officers. In that moment of confusion, I dove behind the desk as the study filled with armed cops. Drop it! Drop it now! Mason threw the gun on the floor and raised his hands. Trent and Evelyn stood frozen, their faces showing the exact moment they realized their lives were over. Detective Morton entered the room, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. Oliver Grant, you can come out now. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Did you get everything? Every word. Conspiracy, theft, extortion, attempted murder, and accessory to homicide. They're going away for a very long time. As the officers cuffed Trent, Evelyn, and Mason, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. The rage that had sustained me for the past week was gone, replaced by exhaustion and a hollow victory. David was still dead. Emma and Sophie were still orphans. Justice had been served, but the cost had been devastating. Morton approached me as the prisoners were led away. Are you all right? I think so. What happens now? Now they go to jail and wait for trial. With the evidence we collected tonight, plus everything David's investigator gathered, this should be a slam dunk. They'll probably plead guilty to avoid life sentences. I walked to the window and watched as Trent and Evelyn were loaded into separate police cars. They'd destroyed my brother and nearly destroyed me, but in the end, their greed and arrogance had been their downfall. There's one more thing, Morton said. The Swiss inheritance you mentioned. That's real? $47 million, give or take a few million. She whistled softly. What are you going to do with it? I thought about David's letter, about his concern for Emma and Sophie, about his desire to protect the family even after death. Take care of the girls. Make sure they have everything they need to build good lives despite what their parents did. And the rest? I looked around David's study one last time, at the books he'd never read and the desk where he'd planned his final revenge. I think I'll start a foundation, something to help families torn apart by betrayal and crime. David would have liked that. Morton nodded and left me alone in the study. I poured myself a scotch from David's decanter and raised the glass in a silent toast. Justice is served, brother. Rest in peace. Outside, the police cars disappeared into the night, taking David's killers to face the consequences of their crimes. The mansion was quiet again, but it felt different now, cleaner. The ghosts had been laid to rest. I finished my drink and turned off the lights, leaving the study dark and empty. Tomorrow I would begin the process of rebuilding what Trent and Evelyn had destroyed. Tonight, I would mourn my brother and celebrate his final victory over the people who had betrayed him. The reckoning was complete.